Barton Simmons, welcome back to T-Town. I hope all is well.
All is well. All is quiet on the Western Front here before signing day hits. But yeah, how's it going your way?
Good. I want to let me ask you, because provide some insight. You're there in outside of Nashville at the headquarters of 247 Sports. What's a day like today when you talk about on the eve of National Signing Day? What's it like in the building? Is the work locked up, or is this probably the most hectic time, or is it Christmas morning? Kind of give us some insight of what's it really like as you guys get ready to watch all your work, end in just a couple of hours, and all the prognosticating will be finished.
Yeah, it's actually a really busy day over here. I mean, for one, we're certainly spreading the word from a media standpoint, having talks like this, but also tracking down the where guys are going in the final hours, minutes before National Signing Day hits, and also nailing down the final pieces to our signing day coverage. We're going to have on the 24/7 Sports Facebook Live page, we're going to have two different 3-hour live shows from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Central, and then from 12 to 3 Central. Nick Saban will be on in the afternoon, along with about 12 or 15 other coaches. So it's going to be a busy day in that front, and just sort of the coordination and planning for that is taking up a big chunk of our day today.
Barton, what does it say about Nick Saban that he loses? The estimate is probably about 70% of his coaching staff are replacing those guys. 7 out of the 10 assistant coaches. He's losing all those different things. Certainly, when you talk about Clemson able to get the job done in Santa Clara, but he's still able to hold everything together. And surely the early signing period paid off this year for Nick Saban significantly. But what does it say about Nick Saban that he's able to keep everything together and still be able to sign what is projected as the number one recruiting class?
Well, I mean, he's the best at recruiting. I don't know that it's debatable. And I think because, a couple things I think play in. One, he's not just a recruiter; he's an evaluator, and he takes a personal role in the evaluations. And so often, Alabama's class is built on guys that they really had good early evaluations on, that they've been tracking and recruiting for a long time. And Nick Saban is so involved from a personal standpoint, as a front-facing figure that is active on the recruiting trail. And so that all helps. But then at the end of the day, look, there's been coaching turnover before at Alabama, and it never seems to affect what the on-field product is. It never affects the message, the experience at Alabama. And so I think that Nick Saban, it's a pretty easy sell. That look, you're ultimately not going to Alabama to play for an assistant coach. That's just not what it is. You're going there to play for Nick Saban. So as long as Nick Saban is there, I think that the message remains for recruits and for prospects. And so I think that he's his own best friend in that regard, and being able to finish these classes because of what he's accomplished personally.
Bart, how much is Nick Saban, do you feel like, that it is taken to another level? 5 years ago, I think I was asking you about the opposing coaches using Nick Saban's age. Well, now 5 years later, we're talking about a guy that's going to turn 68 later this year. Yeah, he's the best-looking 68-year-old that you'll ever find. I hope I can even look somewhat the same as 68 for him. But at some point, whether that's 4 or 5 years down the road, whenever it's going to be, Nick Saban's going to hang up the headsets. When that's going to be, I think, is obviously something that these coaches are using against him. How much you think it's happening right now? You think it's quite a bit?
Yeah, I would suspect it is, because what else are you going to use?
Sure.
You got to find something, and that's about the only thing you can use. But again, look, I think so often when that's a negative recruiting tactic, it's a little bit more tangibly present from a standpoint of, look, you can see the program starting to decline. You can see the coach starting to look older and act older. And, man, I'm telling you, Nick Saban, he looks younger now than he did 10 years ago. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what his diet is. What does he do? He does the oatmeal cream pies in the morning or something.
He does.
Whatever he's doing, it's working. And so it's just I don't know that when a kid sits down with Nick Saban, they feel the impending age come, and so they can kind of make that decision for themselves. And you said he's 68. I didn't know what his age was.
Well, no, he's 67. He'll be 68 later this year.
Either way. I mean, it's just crazy to think that he's 68 years old, because it's just the drive doesn't seem to be diminishing at all, and certainly hey, you can say what you want about that loss to Clemson this year, but prior to that game, we're talking about this as one of the best teams of all time, and so the chinks in the armor aren't exactly flashing yet, and I think that it's just it makes it a little bit of a tougher sell for these programs that are trying to negative recruit from that standpoint, because again, Nick Saban is really good at continuing to stay consistent and not showing much letdown.
Barton, give me the projection. Is there anybody that can push Alabama for that number one spot tomorrow?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, Georgia's the only team that is in striking distance, and I think that would just, even as we do the calculations, Georgia, a number one class for Georgia, I think is only really possible in theory. I don't know that there's any realistic scenario where Alabama's not number one. So I would expect us to call it for Alabama fairly early in the day tomorrow as the number one class. At this point, really, for Nick Saban, it's about where is this class going to stack up historically. We don't think it can catch the 2010 Florida class, but it could catch the 2017 Alabama class if everything hits perfectly. And if it doesn't, then it's still probably going to land in the top five in terms of historical classes per the 24/7 Sports rankings. So it's pretty impressive to see what he's put together 1 year after dipping for the first time in 8 years to anything outside the number one.
Well, Barton, when you go back for just a couple of seconds, you're saying that this could be Nick Saban's, could be, if he gets a couple of pieces of the puzzle, that this could be arguably one of his top classes, if not number one, number two?
It will be one of his top classes. Now, where it falls in the pecking order is to be determined. There is a scenario in which this could be Nick Saban's best class. That scenario probably involves them landing Jerrion Ealy, a running back. That is, he took an official to Alabama. I think that would be a surprise. I don't think anyone expects that necessarily, but it is possible. And so, again, if that doesn't happen, the more likely scenario is still that this is a top five class of all time, which could put them, I guess that would make them third among all Nick Saban's classes. So, again, pretty good company there with this class is starting to track towards.
When you look at Ely, where do you see him going?
Ole Miss appears to be the program that's making a move. And remember, this is a guy that's probably going to play Major League Baseball, probably going to get drafted in the first round this spring. Still plans to sign an LOI. Programs are still sending him an LOI. Programs may only get 1 year out of him because he may pull a Kyler Murray, play for a year in this fall, and then head to the major leagues next spring. He wants to play football, but I think baseball is his first love. So because of that, it's sort of a unique recruitment. But I think that Ole Miss, just over the last month or so, has really surged. He was once committed to the Rebels and could be heading back there again. But again, I wouldn't count out Alabama in this one either.
Henry T. is a guy that we've got a chance to know. We're going to have to learn how to say his last name. That's going to be a little bit tricky. But when you look at Henry T. out of California, Concord, California, the famous high school, where do you think he makes his decision if you're projecting on the eve of National Signing Day?
I probably would stick with Alabama. That's been the leader, the favorite through most of the process here, certainly most of the senior season. That said, look, Tosh Lupoy, he was his lead recruiter. He's off to the NFL. I mean, that's one where the coaching turnover could hit Alabama because Washington's doing a really good job recruiting out west. Chris Peterson is really an underrated recruiter, does it a little bit different than some others, but when they want a guy, they've got a great shot at getting them. And that, that's a team to watch with just enough of a crack in the door that perhaps they could kind of push it down and bust it open. So that's one I'm interested in, but I still think Alabama is in a good position.
All right, who else would you think is some possibilities, maybe likely people, players that will commit to the University of Alabama tomorrow?
Well, look, I think obviously one of the guys that you need to keep an eye on for tomorrow for Alabama is a guy that's actually committed to Alabama. Chris Bogle is a kid that committed to Alabama in early January and was, really torn. I mean, had a really hard time making that decision. And since that decision, there's been more change. There's been more coaching change at Alabama, more reason to doubt that decision that was already really tenuous to begin with. And so I think as Florida and Miami really work to flip him, that's a kid that Alabama has to treat like he's uncommitted. And I think that Alabama has as good a chance as anybody in signing him, but I do think that that's one to watch. Ishmael Sopsher's another one, defensive tackle, high-level, 4-star guy out of Louisiana. Always interesting when those Alabama, LSU, Louisiana kids, those sort of battles are usually really highly contested, closely fought, and this is going to be more of the same. That's a bit of a coin flip right now. And then Brett Seither, who's been an interesting kind of late riser on the recruiting trail. Really, that's a Georgia-Alabama battle, it looks like at this point. It's a Florida tight end prospect. I'm not sure where that one stands. I think that could be as much of a coin flip as anything as well.
What do you make out of Carson Beck decommitting last night?
Look, I mean, from what I know is really just what his quotes and the quotes from his dad and family. And I mean, you understand where he's coming from in the sense that, look, in fact, I really think it's a mature decision if you're looking at it from the sense of I committed to this group of offensive coaches. All those offensive coaches are now gone. Let's just be honest about this thing. I'm going to back off and see who's hired and see if I have the same comfort level there as I did with the previous group. I mean, look, Alabama, I believe there's going to be opportunity for playing time in Alabama at the quarterback position once Tua's gone. And Carson Beck had a great junior season and certainly is capable of competing right away. And so, I think it is a mature decision to say I probably need to go ahead and make sure that my comfort level remains with this new staff before I just go ahead and carry my commitment over. And so it appears Alabama still has a shot. But, that said, anytime a kid decommits, it's, you obviously like it a lot better from an Alabama perspective if he's on board.
Hey, Barton, final question, and it's going to be the theme that we sort of set the stage, and as our guest, we'd like to ask them to participate as well. But one of the questions that we're going to ask our audience today, best high school player that you ever saw in person. I know that your sample size is much larger than any of us. You could go back years and years and years. You could stay with the current year. Best high school prospect you ever saw in person play.
All right, let's see. So I'm going to go with, and this is going to sound, I'll go with two. One, I played against a guy named John Henderson in high school.
Sure.
I mean, that dude, talk about a man amongst boys. I mean, he still is one of the biggest human beings I've ever seen. I don't care what the height, weight says. His presence on a football field is as freaky as it comes. So that's an old one for the old head. But in terms of more recent, I mean, look, this is going to sound like it's catering to your audience a little bit, but a name that pops in my head whenever this question is asked is Trent Richardson. I still remember watching Trent Richardson play on a Friday night in the Panhandle of Florida, and I watched him one night rush for, I want to say it was like 415 yards. And it was just it wasn't a couple like 90-yard runs against a shoddy defense. It was just sort of 20 yards a pop all game long. And it was a game where they needed every one of those yards. And so that's one of my more memorable in-person experiences, watching a kid play. And I've always been a big fan of Trent just as a player. I know it didn't really work out for him in the NFL, and I guess he's in the AAF now, but his performance and is always one that kind of catches my attention and I remember well.
Yeah, and another guy that I know it never ended up where he was actually playing collegiate ball at this level, committed to Alabama multiple times, but here locally, Titus Ryan. I've never seen a kid that was on that level as far as speed and size. I mean, you either have one or the other, and he was about 215 and probably in that 4.3 range. I know it never ended up, but as far as on that high school level, he was as dominant of a player as I ever witnessed.
Yeah, and look, that's what's fun about the conversation is I think, what you are as a high school player, sometimes it doesn't translate. Sometimes you don't develop any longer. Sometimes something happens. But, man, there are some legends from the high school field that never hit that you talk to the local folks and, they'll swear it's the greatest of all time. So I love the debate. I love the conversation. I love hearing people's answers.
Barton Simmons, Director of Scouting for 247 Sports, the co-host of the Cover 3 podcast on 247sports.com. Subscribe on iTunes. But the best way to connect with Barton Simmons, join those 60-plus thousand people that connect with Barton Simmons on the Twitter account, straight up at Barton Simmons, the Director of Scouting for 247 Sports and CBSSports.com. Barton, as always, thank you again for being a part of the show. I know it's a very hectic time. I appreciate the opportunity today on the eve of National Signing Day. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. And, hey, check out our show on Facebook tomorrow, 7 to 10 a.m. Central, 12 to 3 in the afternoon as well. Again, we'll have Nick Saban on there. We'll have a bunch of other coaches around the country, and we'll be recapping all the news and breaking it as it hits as well.
Now, will that be happening on the main 247 Sports or like Bama Online, which is the local website that covers the University of Alabama? Will it be all linked in there together, or how will people get
It'll
to
be
it?
on our 247 Sports Facebook Live page, and that'll be on our Bama Facebook as well, and stream through all of our Facebook sites. But also, if you go to Bama Online, you'll be able to find links and ways to get to it from the site as well.
BamaOnline.com with Charlie Potter, Hank South, and Travis Ryan, all those guys. Barton, as always, thank you again for your time. Have a great afternoon, sir.
You bet. Thank you.